All right, welcome to a longer form video, but I feel like keeping it all in one sort of stream of consciousness and a mildly structured plan is going to be really good for this. So I've spent the last like 2 weeks doing R&D, studying these landscape style designs. So I've been trying to figure out, okay, how can I make a whole bunch of projects sort of looking like this, studying it, how to do it. And I've got a bunch of stuff to show you guys and how you can go about making animations. I ended up with all of my work making 4 different animations. And so what this video, the goal of it is to show you how to make your own animation. So similar to the way that I made 4 animations from all of my studying, I would hope that you would walk away from this video being able to make your own equally interesting and cool animations. I'm telling you, a blower living at an apartment, the grass people with the blower is the bane of my existence. The amount of times I'd have to stop a video, stop talking. If you haven't seen the videos coming out on YouTube, I'll be releasing those projects on YouTube so you can kind of see how a lot of these elements can be combined into a really cool animation. This video is meant to show you all of the elements by themselves, and you can combine them to make your own animations, and you can kind of see the videos on YouTube as a way to give you some inspiration on how you could do that. And also, I guess I can link this Pinterest board for you guys to look at as well for more inspiration. But how do we make cool stuff? Let's learn how to make some cool stuff. So first, I want to start out with those grid floors that you see in a lot of these designs. So if you look at, animations like this, where you have this grid floor, you can see there's these grids on the ground. This one's connected to the displacement. This grid here. So first I want to show you how to create the grids, because they do really help ground the designs. They're also really cool, and I think help fill out the animation when you're designing as well. So let me show you tons of ways to make these grids, all the different variations. And so first we're going to start out with making just a basic grid. So we're going to do dots, squares, and then like a wireframe square. So some of this might be quite basic to you, but we're covering all of the basics today. So just go ahead, get a flat grid. It doesn't even need to be subdivided. That's not necessary. We're going to go here to the shading tab, and I'm going to delete. Well, that didn't go the way I wanted. I like my windows to be this way, and then I'm going to switch this here to the shader editor. And my allergies are acting up, so that'll be fun to have to talk and breathe out of my mouth, because my nose is useless right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and click a new window. I'm just going to use Eevee for now, just so I can make it look like this. So for these grids, I'm just going to use an emission node. So plug that right here. And then the old way that I would normally set these up, let's go ahead, Shift-A, and search a Voronoi texture. The old way I would do it is I would get a texture, a color ramp, and then if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, go ahead and just hit Control-T, or get a mapping in a texture coordinate node. We're going to use Object. The old way would be plug the texture into a color ramp into the color, and we're going to get something here. Now, that's great until you start getting multiple color ramps affecting different things, and then you go, oh wait, I don't want red anymore, I want blue. Then you have to go to each color ramp and copy and paste the hex code. That's annoying, especially if you're doing this several times and you're making group nodes. What I do is I go one extra step, and I get a mix color node, and I plug what I would normally plug into the color into the factor. And so rather than the color being chosen here as sort of the visual output, you're choosing it here. So now what you can do, say once we get to the portion where we're combining these textures, you have one texture looking one way, one texture doing another thing. And then when you're done, and you're picking what color you want your grid to be, you can just go ahead and plug in RGB into everything, and you'll change the color to red, and all of the different patterns that are combined into what's making your grid floor, you just do it once. And you're done. Or if it ends up being a group node, you just plug the group node socket into all of the colors. And when you're playing with the group node, that one will show up and you do the edit once. So it's one extra step, but I think it's really useful. Okay, so if you don't have this, get a texture coordinate using the object, a mapping, a Voronoi using the distance, color ramp, mix. So what we're going to do to make this a grid is go from random, bring your random to 0. Then you can take the color ramp and shape this stuff. So what you can take is the color ramp and bring it in, and now you have a grid of dots. Now notice it's soft. There may be times you want that. I don't want it. So we'll go from linear to constant. And what that's going to create is now a solid edge. And so now you have a floor of dots. There we go. We have that. Another thing you can do is play with this output right here. If you switch this from Euclidean, which is creating circles, and go here to Chebyshev, you are now going to have a grid of squares. Now here's what's cool. See how this is like that? If I go ahead and flip my color ramp, we now have this grid, which is used all of the time in the floor of these topographic landscapes. So now we have 3 patterns that are incredibly useful off the bat. So I'm going to give this just a scale of 1. So there you go. Super simple. We have a grid. You can flip it to look like that, and then you can also do circles. Now that's really basic, and there are definitely going to be times where you want to have this and then dots in the middle, or maybe dots at every joint. So how can you combine patterns? You can combine patterns by getting another mix color right here and plugging it here and going, okay, so we have this pattern plugging into A, and let's get another pattern. So see that? What we're going to do is say, we're going to use another pattern to make a differentiation between this pattern and the next pattern. So if you want to control this lower pattern, the color of it that is, so I'll bring the factor over to the left. If you want to control the color of it, it's going to be this white bar right there. So I'm going to bring him to be a white. I don't know why it looks gray. Oh, it's like that. Okay. What we can do now is say I want to have a dot on every single one of these cross sections. So what we can do is get a color ramp. In fact, I can just go ahead and duplicate this, and then I'm gonna hit Control-Shift-D, or just get another Voronoi texture that's connected to the mapping. And remember, plug the distance into the color ramp, and then we can just plug this here. So I'm gonna bring my scale to like 5, bring this in. So now we have a grid like this. Pretty cool. I'm gonna go here to Euclidean, and then this is at a scale of 1. So I'm gonna do maybe a scale of 0.5. That's gonna do that. Maybe scale of 1, we'll put it right in the middle. We'll do maybe a scale of 0.25. Maybe a scale of 2. And maybe we would try 1.5. So there's different ways that you can fit them in if you're doing it in equal parts, essentially. So maybe we'll do a scale of 2. That's 5. And now you have a dot at each cross section, also middle section and middle point. And so you can look at it as like, what would it take to get a dot at each cross section? You would need to have the Voronoi texture, both of them at an equal scale. So say 2 and 2. So see that? Now they're right here in the middle. What you would do then is we need to be able to move these around. We have the same mapping here, so just move them both. What you would do is get another vector math node, and when a vector math node is just set to add, that's like this section right here, the location section. So you would just plug this here and go, all right, I'm gonna move it up like this, and then I think 0.25, and there you go. Now you have 1 in the middle. So See how this is a value of 2, value of 2? So you can go, okay, 0.25. Like these numbers make sense because we're working with 2, but hey, we can make this 0.5. See how that works? Let's make him 5. All right, see how everything lines up in kind of a dumb way, but it lines up. So you can do this like 2.5. That doesn't work. So you can keep things even numbers. Notice how that is even to 2. That works. When it was 5, kind of worked, but kind of didn't. So remember how these numbers in relation to each other, and your life will be much easier rather than trying to eyeball everything. So I can make this 1. See how that looks now? Value of 2, value of 1. He's the one that's controlling the dots. He's the one that's controlling the grid. And then I can just make the dots smaller. So now you can have fun with that. And now we have combined a pattern. We can go further with it. There's kind of infinite patterns we can do here. So let's do another pattern where we have grids, large dots, and then let's do some small dots. So let's get another mix color node. I'm gonna get another color ramp. I'm gonna go from this bottom one so it stays connected to this mapping node. He has his own. We'll plug distance here, color into the factor, and again, we have this white to control this new color pattern that we picked. So now you can do this, or let's say he's a value of 2. Let's make him like, let's see, these are 1, 2, 1. Let's do like 6. See how that fits? See how he's like right next to that square? I would maybe make the circle a little bit smaller. We've now created a brand new pattern for the floor, and we can switch this from squares. See, it's Chebyshev. You can go to Euclidean. Now it's circles. They all work together. Patterns getting combined. So it's really, really cool. And there's more customization we can go further with this. So you can save this pattern, use it for later. And then again, like I mentioned, I'm going to get an RGB node, and I'm going to plug that into every socket that is white. And then now when I change the color, all of them change at the same time, which inherently means each one of these can have its own color. See how ugly that is? But you get the idea. Everything can be the same. Let's go ahead and make even more of these custom shapes. So what I want to do is show you how you can combine textures to make a dashed line. So let's go back to the current project file that we're using. Let me show you how to build this. So let's just go back to basics. I'm gonna highlight everything except for a mix RGB. Let's zoom back in on that. And let's get in a color ramp. Plug him in there. And let's get in a Voronoi texture, hitting Control T, using the object, and plugging the distance there. One of these guys needs to be black. We'll make a white. So let's make the first cross section. So we're going to go ahead and go from Euclidean to Chebyshev, and then we need to flip this color ramp, switch it to constant. Maybe I didn't need to delete all the nodes that I did. Let's do a scale of 1, and then bring this guy to whatever thickness you want it to be. Obviously, can be changed at any point. So now let's make a checkered pattern. So what I'm gonna do is get another mix, and then we'll make B white. We'll get another color ramp. We'll actually just duplicate this color ramp, plug it here, and then duplicate this Voronoi, hitting Control Shift D so it stays connected. Plug, plug. What we need to do is flip this color ramp so he's like this. You're going to see that happen. What we need to do is say he's a scale of 1. Let's try a scale of 4 and make B black. I meant to make him black, not white, because we're cutting a hole. Instead of adding, normally when we're adding a pattern, we will make it white because we're adding another white pattern. In this case, we're kind of adding a black on top, but in this case, because it's just black and white, we're kind of removing. We're going to change the scale to actually 2. And now we have a checkered, like a dotted pattern. Of course, it's not super, super dotted. What I'll do is make him a value of 2 and him a value of 8 of 4. And then we can just bring this in like that. Now it's a dot checkered. I keep saying checkered, but it's like a dot pattern essentially. And so say he's a scale of 2, we'll make him a scale of 8, much more dotted. And then you can change the size with these color ramps. So you can make him maybe longer, maybe not so long. But the trick for this one is making sure that these numerically line up. So if he wants to be a size of 3, he needs to be something like 6 or even 12. So multiple, I think the term would be multiples of each. So again, if he wants to be a scale of 2, then he would need to be a scale of 4, 8, 6 did not work, even 10, so we go up to 12. So try those multiples to get your different dotted line sizes. So hey, I don't want that many squares. Well, let's go ahead and make it 0.5 and then make him like 2. Larger squares, still dotted. So that's pretty sweet. Now I'm looking at this and it reminds me that the last thing I want to show you guys in terms of this texture combining, I want to show you guys one more pattern. I'm going to show you how to make a plus icon situation and then a thinner line in the middle. Let's build that. So what I'm not going to make the same mistake I did last time. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the color ramp in the mix. So we have our color ramp, we have our mix shader. He is black. All right, so let's go ahead and get a Voronoi texture. Hitting Control T, using the object coordinate, using the distance. We have this. Let's go ahead and make our squares. So that's going to be a Chebyshev. And then flip the color ramp. So let's just give it a scale of 1. So what I want to do is just get a plus icon. And essentially what I'm asking is to delete this portion of everything. So we just keep this. That is going to be, if you've never encountered the concept of masking. So let's make the other pattern that we are going to mask. So we are going to mask. Let's just go ahead and take this situation here, Control Shift D, duplicate. And I'm just going to plug him into here to show you what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and invert the color ramp. And we're going to use squares to say all of the pattern that is within this, only show that, delete everything around it. So let me show you how we're going to do that. So let's plug him back here. We have this pattern. Let's get another mix color. So we're going to plug him right into the factor. And I'm going to bring this color up a little bit to show what we're trying to do. So if I take this black portion, and like I showed earlier, getting another vector math node, if I take him and I bring him over, see that? We're revealing something. And if I were to bring this black down to black, we'll do that. So what we'll do is I'll just bring him over to here and then bring him down here. We are revealing, if I bring this color back down, this plus icon, which is super cool. So what I can do is say, it looks like they both need to be 0.5 to create the plus. And then up here, the size of the plus is here. And then the thickness of the plus is depicted here. So say, make it about that thick. And remember this white one, that is controlling the color. So what I want to do is I want to get another mix shader, make it white, and let's get another grid. So let's just duplicate probably this color ramp here, this Voronoi, and then plug the vector into him. And then let's just plug distance, just like this. And then I think he needs to be flipped. Yeah. And when we flip it, we have thinner grids for the floor. So there you go. That is sort of the grid situation things. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to simulate or mimic a topographic map just with shading, no geometry, no displacement helping that be made. So let's jump into that. All right, so I want to show you how we can simulate kind of a backgroundy, I really don't know how to describe it other than we're simulating, we're kind of mimicking a topographic landscape with lines, different line thicknesses, different color. We have those grids that we made in the background. You can see like the yellow difference here. So how we're going to make this with procedural shading. So let's build that. So get a piece of geometry. I'm just going to go ahead and do one of these little ditties. And let's get all those nodes that we needed before, including using Eevee. Get that emission, mix color, and we're going to get a color ramp. This time, we're actually going to plug the first pattern into A rather than a factor because we're going to do something a little bit different. Let's go ahead and get a wave texture. Control T to get that mapping set up, and then let's plug color into color ramp. So now we're going to have some waves. So if we want them to be really solid, we're going to switch them over to constant, and let's just bring the factor over to the left so we can just see the wave that we're creating. So see this? Now there's a certain thickness you can make them. What you can do, if you want them to be even thinner, is you go from sine to saw, and that allows you a little bit more thinness. The reason why is if I bring this over to ease, this is sine. It's squishing it from both sides, and it's basically saying, all right, you can only make it so thin. What happens with saw is it seems to behave a little bit more differently. From what I found, it just helps you make the lines even thinner. That's the only difference. So I'm going to bring it over here to a constant and just pick a line thickness. It doesn't really matter. So what we can do now is add in a noise texture to now distort all those lines that we just created with the pattern of a noise. So you can bring this up and then bring this in. And now we have the beginnings of that very typical topographic landscape vibe. But check this out. I'm going to go ahead and make this, this color white. And what I want to do is get another color ramp. Let's plug it into the factor. And let's just plug the noise. I'm actually going to use the factor. I don't know how much of a difference that really is going to make. Plug the factor here. And what happens when I bring this in, notice how it's starting to mask out just a solid white color within these lines that we created by combining the wave and the Voronoi. And this is going to create a really cool opportunity. So if I switch this over to constant, and we say, okay, I'm making a mask. So anything that I plug into B will be contained within this surface area that I'm defining with this mask. What does that mean? That means I can go ahead, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-D, duplicate this exact wave texture. Let's get this color ramp duplicated, and let's plug this here and this here. So now this wave texture is going to be contained within this white portion or whatever we tell it to be. So I'm just going to say be that white portion and then plug that here. And what happens is if I bring up the scale of this Voronoi, you're going to have more dense lines within that space, which is really, really cool to make it look as if there's kind of like higher elevation in these areas. So I'm going to bring up the thickness here. And so what you can do is here on the distortion of this wave texture, you can play with that. See how cool that is? I'm going to bring that back. So bring up the distortion, and it's going to get like these random thicker ones. And I'm going to say, hey, maybe I want there to be more of these or less of these. And then now what we have is a little bit more variation. If I make the other lines thinner up here, this color ramp, to match these here, you have something really, really awesome. And then what we could do, you can further edit everything with this noise texture. So we can bring up the detail a little bit to give it even more interest and then bring up that roughness. So you can have a ton of fun with this, doing whatever you want to do. So you can, bring detail to 0, and that doesn't look like a map at all. Lots of things we can do here. So now we have this, which is really, really awesome. And then the scale of the noise is going to bring up the scale of everything. So now we have this. Now let's just go ahead, have some fun, and start mixing things. So first, we have no way to control the color of things easily. So let's plug this mix color into a factor. Make this looks like the bottom one white and the top one black. So now we can just change the color of everything at once, which is awesome. Let's do this again. I want to have some yellow trails going through it, like we're kind of differentiating the map. So what we can do is actually just have some fun. I'm going to go to edit mode and just make more space for the rest of this map. So what we're going to do is just get another mix. I'm going to say I want this to be a nice yellow. And let's define the pattern that's going to show up in yellow. So let's get a color ramp. Let's get a wave, because I want to show you guys how to kind of make this situation with just a wave texture alone. So we're going to plug this mapping here and plug the color into the color ramp. So now we have these waves. Make this constant. We're going to go here from sine to saw. Tiny little waves that we can scale up a little bit. So what we can do is bring up the distortion, and it's going to bring a similar pattern with some slight differences. And as you play with it, you will experience those slight differences. So let's bring this thinner. And there we go. Now we have, and then you can play with the phase offset. If I make this thicker, you can see it. Play with that phase offset, and then we can go from X, maybe we can do Y, change the position of things. This will look better. There we go. Now you can notice there's a bit of, layered. You can see how this looks like it's on top of the white. You can always swap that if you want. This is fine with me. And then just to kind of contain everything, to contain everything to make it look like, hey, it's part of a map, part of a cool system. Let's do another mix color ramp. We're going to get a Voronoi. Again, the same mapping system that we've been using. And then let's just make a cross section for the background just to make this look as mappy as we want it to be. So bring that here. Chebyshev. And then let's say scale of 1.5. It's like that. It's as thin as it's going to go. So there we go. Now we've created or simulated changes in elevation, topographic map, fun vibe, cool stuff all around. This is how to create the shading to make this really cool stuff like this. So much like my larger courses, I would say like pause here, go back and rewatch this again if you feel like you don't know what you're doing. These are those things that just you get better with repetition if you really want to master kind of making these patterns and making them look really cool. So this is the shading, most of the shading in this little course. All right, we learned about keeping everything, or how to do all the shading portions, how to keep everything into the shading. Now we're going to move into creating the displacement. Now I'm going to use geometry nodes as almost in the exact same way that you could the displacement modifier. If you're more comfortable with the displacement modifier, this is probably a great way to learn displacement in geometry nodes. It's not as scary as you think, and you get a lot more control. So this is, it's gonna be a whole lot of fun. So let's just create the displacement that's going to make that map look. So we're going to start out, hit Shift A, get a plane. I'm going to hop into the Geometry Nodes workspace, and what I always do, because I'm allergic to saving preferences, is oh wow, I love that it did that. That makes me so angry. All right, well, we're just going to make two. I like two windows. This one being the geometry node editor, this one being the viewport. All right. Not actually angry. I was joking when I said angry. Let's make some displacement. So we're going to click New in Geometry Nodes Workspace. We're going to delete the input, which represents this little piece of geometry. And we're going to replace it with our own grid. So Shift-A, search, grid, put it here. I'm going to go to scale of 10, and I'm going to give it, I don't know, 100 vertices. If you've never done it before, the way to create any kind of displacement in geometry nodes is with a set position node. Now, what we can do, we're going to be using the noise texture for all of the map looking displacement done here in geometry nodes. And we're going to plug color into the offset. What that's doing is it's combining X, Y, Z and pushing it. And you can notice kind of pushed it at an angle. That's how you can usually tell all three axes are acting at the same time. We need to be able to say, separate the X, Y, Z. Actually, wow. Combine the X, Y, Z. We need to get a combine X, Y, Z node to say only displace on the Z axis. Now, what I've been using a lot is heteroterrain. There isn't a huge difference between the two other than, I mean, off the bat, it looks super terrainy. If we look at FBM, that's how it looks off the bat. So it does kind of jumpstart you with a really good looking displacement already. And also, you don't have to click normalize. Once you click normalize and you scale it up, it looks pretty similar to heteroterrain. So there's not a whole, it's just really just preference. And it's a very small difference. At the end of the day, we're just creating displacement, so it's not a big deal. Now, if we want to control this, we're going to get a vector math node, and we're going to set it to scale. So you have one scale slider. This is the same as multiply. I don't know the difference between the two, other than obviously this one has X, Y, it's a vector. It has your vectors right here. Scale is just one scale. So it combines them. I understand there is a difference. I know there's an obvious difference here. It's the vectors. But in this case, like it's multiplying this, but one slider essentially. So that makes our life easier. Now, notice there's things jutting down and up. We're talking about simulating terrain here. Terrains are typically flat and then elevation upwards. So how can we cut off this bottom portion? You could get a color ramp, and that is going to slice the bottom. And that's great. That is what we're looking for. Couple things. It's perfectly smooth. There's no bumpiness. So you would then have to figure out how to add the bumpiness. You could go here to FBM, uncheck normalize, and then you could control it a little better like that. Still not the best. I have found, so we're just going to take this off. I'm going to delete this. Let's get a RGB curves. This is a little bit, I found this to be far better in this workflow for editing your displacement. So what I'll do is I'll get a node, I think they're called nodes. I'll get a node here, and then I'm going to put one right here as well. So what's going to happen is I kind of want to keep my edits within this little square. So if I bring this up, check that out. We now are flattening the bottom, but it's still not dead flat. There's still some detail. There's still some information. I'm going to bring up my vertices so we can enjoy this displacement a little bit more. See that? If we bring this down, obviously it's going to bring it down, but bring it up like that, it's going to be better. And so that is going to give you a better, flatter bottom, but it's going to maintain these top portions because they're not even being touched. They're not, I mean, they're acting a little bit, they're reacting a little bit, but not in any major way. So now we have a far better looking displacement floor, quote unquote, that we can then do things like this too. So you have a little bit more control. So keeping, at least for the floor, keeping the edits within this square, and really this half of this bottom square is going to give you a better, more terrain-like looking terrain. Now, one more thing that I want to show you how to do, which is how to, if you ever want to, mirror this displacement that we just created. In animations that I do a lot, I like to loop things, and you can't loop an animation without mirroring a displacement that you created. That's just not possible. So what we can do is get a transform geometry and a join geometry. What this does is create a duplicate. So what I'm gonna do, since I scaled him by 10, I'm gonna put him on the X of 10. Notice, see that? That is not a good mirror. You can't, it's not mirroring, it's just duplicating and throwing it that direction. What we have to do is put this -1, and there we go. We have now mirrored our displacement, and then you can then transform geometry, get another join geometry, and say, I'm gonna do it on the 20. We have now mirrored everything we're doing here. So if you ever feel the need to want to, especially with looping animations, like the loop that I made with the wires going up and down, that is how you do it, in case you ever want to know. I am going to go ahead and delete my whole mirror situation, and let's go look at some more techniques, some more cool things in this tutorial. So that is how you generate displacement, and that is how you tile, mirror, loop the displacement. Let's go ahead and when it comes to rendering, we figured out how to make the grid floor that we're going to throw under it. But when it comes to visualizing this displacement to make it look like, really cool artistic topographic map art, what are the different ways to visualize displacement? So let's look at those ways. So there's two ways to do it. You can either do it with the shading, or you can do it simply with the geometry itself. So let's look at how to do that with just the shading, and then I'll show you how to do it with the geometry. That'll make more sense as we go. So let's do a really, really easy one. So we are going to need shading. So let's get the set material node right over here. Let's create a material, and we're just going to immediately say be emission. And let's just go to the shading and make our shading workspace. So bring him down. I'm going to bring him up, and I'm going to switch him to the shader editor. So here's what we can do. Are we in Eevee? No, we are in cycles. Let's go to Eevee for now. What I'm gonna do is, got to go back to geometry nodes and select that material. That was a mistake. All right, now he's white. So what we can do, I'm gonna get a color ramp, plug him right into here. Let's get a gradient texture, plug him here. There we go. Nice. I'm gonna hit Control T, use the object coordinate. That's going to send that very harsh gradient right here to the middle. So what I'll do is I'll get a separate XYZ and use the Z. And immediately we have this very smooth, pretty nice looking way to see the displacement. And then you can say, hey, make it red, or hey, make it a combination of red and blue. Fun, right? The way we can move it around, I like to do it with we'll get a math node, keep it on add, and the add will move it around. And then you can do a B-spline to make it a little bit smoother. But this is one way to move it around. And then like I did in this animation, see how it's really smooth? It's just like a beautiful smooth gradient. You can actually get a map range to do a really, really cool effect. If you throw a map range here, you can go to stepped linear, and you could say, oh, I want to have it, you could actually define, I want 7 steps. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my math node to bring it down a little bit. And then you can say, hey, make it be fewer steps than that, like that. And so now whenever you're actually switch the order of this, now when you are defining the color ramp and the colors of that ramp, it feels a little bit more artistic and intentional because, well, it just looks better. Now you can have a lot of fun with these colors and playing with it like that, and you can visualize it just like this and have a ton of fun, make it look really beautiful, and that is a really, really cool way to do it. Another way to do it, I'm going to go ahead and just keep that. I'm going to go back to the geometry, and I'm going to bring my vertices down to 50. So you're going to see it like that, actually maybe 25. So it's like super low poly, and then we'll go back to shading. Another way to visualize the geometry, visualize that displacement we created, was with a wireframe node. If you've never used this, it's pretty fun. It just does that. That's how you can get that really vintage geometry look. Now, you can't, you can see how it's kind of, what's the term? Triangulated geometry. You can't get the squares until we get into the portion of this tutorial where I show you how to visualize geometry using geometry. So if you're fine with that triangulated look, this wireframe modifier is going to be super fun. I'm going to slice that. I'm going to go back to geometry nodes. I'm going to get my vertices back to like 400, which is not normally what you would use. It just, it's not super aggressive on my computer, so I can handle it. Let's go back to shading. And now that we have geometry, you can see that we have geometry. So earlier in the shading, I showed you how to mimic changes in geometry. Now I'm going to show you how to show changes in geometry. It's going to make a similar look. And that'll make sense. So let's head back to shading. Let's get a color ramp. And let's get in a wave texture. Hit Control T, use the object coordinate, and let's plug color here. So here's one way to do it. You can change scale. I'm going to go here to constant, and that is one really, really awesome kind of like, I don't know why the Tame Impala comes up. This feels like very musical to me. And this would be one really cool way to do it. And then what you can do is get in a mix shader, bring that up, a mix shader. We'll get a transparent BSDF, and then just say, hey, I'm going to invert color node. And now it's transparent. You can see if I duplicate this, you can see the guy under it. And then you can throw a grid under this and make a really cool scene. So that's how you use transparency, and super quick. But we're not really going to focus on that. So this is one way using shading to show the displacement with a wave. Check this out. This is X, that's Y. This is Z. It's freaking awesome. So if I bring up the scale and I hit the tilde key to go to the top, it's very, very similar to when I masked out a portion of the wave texture and then scaled that portion up. So we can bring the scale down and do this. Now the drawback is this portion of the wave texture is super thick, that's thin. You can't control that. What we could do is go back to geometry nodes and say, like, go here to the RGB curves and just make this a little flatter. So there's just less of them on the floor, and then we can enjoy that. All up to your taste, all up to what you want to do. But that is one of the drawbacks of that technique, is there's no way to sort of handle the changes in thickness. I'm not a fan of it. If we go back to shading, we can have a little fun with the phase offset and just be like, hey, let's find a spot where the phase isn't too crazy. And you can have fun there. So I would personally, if I wanted to do it like this and when I wanted to avoid those really thick sections, I would flatten out the floor so there's essentially nothing. And then I can just use this black space to create transparency and show that grid that I made on the ground. So you can do whatever you want. That's how I would do that. Now, here's a really cool thing you can do when you are making something using the wave texture and playing with displacement. We can head back to shading, and there's a really cool thing that we can do. So we have this wave texture. Let's get in another mix color, plug him here, and then what I can do is I'm gonna hit Control-Shift-D, get one here on the bottom. And so what I want to do is I'm gonna bring the factor to the left and make one thicker. In fact, I'll just make it thinner, actually, considerably thinner, like that. And then this one, I'll make it a little bit thicker. So now we have changes in thickness here. What I can do is I'm going to get another wave texture, Control-Shift-D. I'm going to get a color ramp. And what I want to do is use a wave texture, a much wider wave texture, which means I'm going to bring it to constant halfway through. And check out how cool this effect is going to be. I'm going to make this scale like scale of 1. Check out what that did. If I play with my phase offset, it's using a wave texture. You can see how it's acting. It's literally this pattern, much wider, revealing thicker and thinner lines. And it offers this really, really cool opportunity. So this one let's bring to sign. There we go. So that the thickness is a little bit more aggressive. There we go. Check that out. And then of course you can make this even bigger so that I've noticed the bigger the scale, that smoother that this animation is going to be. And then you can just bring the color ramp in to just, oh, maybe I just want it 2. But the bigger the scale, see if I bring the scale to like 3, it's really aggressive. Looks like a crappy Christmas light animation. Smaller is smoother. So that would be my recommendation. And then you can play with this color ramp to say how many at a time. And that's how you can make a really, really nice variation in thickness. And this is something that you can't do with the other technique where we're mimicking this. So there's drawbacks to each technique, but you can have a lot of fun. So I showed you how I'm visualizing the displacement with shading. I want to show you how we can visualize the displacement within just geometry itself. What does that mean? All these effects, you can see them within just a flat view, and then you can just throw whatever material you want on it. So let's head back to geometry nodes, and we don't even need to worry about the material. So there's a couple things that we can do. One of the things that we can do, obviously this is the basic version. We already did it right here. What we're seeing here is a visualization of the displacement, and then we can throw, a principled BSDF on it and say, grab it right there. And then I'm going to go like see more all-seen lights. There we go. You can throw any material you want on this. And now we have that. Now with these stylized, with the stylized designs that I did, that I was looking at, none of them really looked like that. If I go to my board here, very little of my inspiration was driven by that. Flat view, like, this is the only one that I saved that I thought, oh, that's cool. But we're combining it. You can take that, like I showed you, and then have a material with the wave and do this. So there's a combination of those two techniques already. But what I want to show you is a few other things that we can have some fun with. So we have this. One thing I can do, let me drop this displacement down to like 25 and then make one like really thin. Let's go ahead and we'll do We're going to do an instance on points node. And we'll just do a icosphere. Plug it here, and then bring that radius down. Check that out. Now it just looks like curves on the displacement. Maybe bring the radius down a little bit more. And so I can maybe bring this in a little bit here. And I noticed if it's more displaced this direction than this direction, it looks better. It looks more interesting. But there we go. That is a way that we can visualize the displacement. This is a way that we can visualize the displacement. We can bring the radius down even further to get this really nice, cool, stylized thing. And then you can make, and then you can just throw an emission, you know, a white emission texture on this, or, you know, like a nice blue. In fact, let's just do that. We have time. Let's go here to the material preview and then turn on the emission, make it blue. And then we can bring our world brightness to black. There we go. So now we have these small dots that look like some really cool displacement. And then you can just kind of bring it in like that. Isn't that cool? So that's super fun and sci-fi. Another thing we can do is I'm going to bring my vertices to like 50 on the grid. And then let's just plug the set position into the geometry. Delete those. We have this. You may have seen me do this hundreds of times on this channel. We're going to do a mesh to curve. Now it's going to do that, and we're going to do a curve to mesh, and we're going to do a curve circle, plug it here, and then you can just bring this down a little bit. Now we can visualize the geometry like this, and then again you can just throw that same emission material on this, and now we've visualized the geometry this way. So that's another way to do it. That's another way to make something cool. And then the last one before I completely switch over to curves is, I think you guys are going to absolutely think this is cool if you've never done it before. We're going to need high geometry. So we'll do like 400, and then I'm going to scale these up a little bit. I'm going to do a map range right before the scale. Throw that here. And then I'm going to go to a stepped linear, and then I'm going to bring up my steps. Check that out. We've made, is this Minecraft, right? Does it look like Minecraft, or am I thinking of something else? And then what we can do is get a subdivide mesh right over here. First off, we're going to do a set shade smooth. And then just to like cheat, in the modifier section, we're going to do a smooth node and just like bring up the repeat just enough to avoid some of those uglies. And that looks, I mean, this looks pretty awesome. This is just another awesome way, which was inspired by this this render that I saw. I didn't put any effort into figuring out how to do this, to be honest with you, but it was inspired by that, and it looks really, really awesome. So this is the last version like this. Now let's move over to curves, and I want to show you two ways to simulate geometry, to show the geometry. So we're just going to go ahead and delete everything, and we're going to get a curve line. Plug this here, and then I'm just going to give the Z of 0, and then we're just going to scale it a little bit here. There we go. So what I want to do is just duplicate a bunch of these down the line. I like using a simulation zone. You can instance it on another line. That creates problems when we are directly displacing. So I'm just going to do a simulation zone, And this is the most primitive, basic use of a simulation zone. So don't be intimidated if you've never done this. What we're going to do is do a transform geometry and a join geometry. So what I want to do is just get a couple duplicated down the axis like this, and then I'm just going to press play, and the amount of frames correlates with the amount of duplicates. So once you have the amount of duplicates that you want, you can go ahead and bake it. We're going to click bake. So now you can move your timeline back, play with your timeline. It's not going to create more duplicates. And then, actually, we'll just do a set position, just because the node takes up less space. Bring it here to the middle. So now what I can do, I'm gonna get another set position to actually create the displacement. I'm gonna get a noise texture, and we're gonna use hetero terrain, plug that into the offset. Two things we need to do is get a combine XYZ, tell it to displace on the Z. What this is saying is these are not subdivided curves. So we need to get a resample curve node and then bring that count up, and that's going to be your subdivision. So now you can bring up that scale, and now we have visualized the displacement with curves, which is really, really cool. And then you can just go ahead and say curve to mesh. So curve to mesh, get a curve circle, and then you just plug that into the profile, and then raise of like 0.005. There we go. And then you'll just throw that same exact material that we have been. There we go. We've visualized displacement with curves. And again, you go over here with a mix, RGB curves node, and say, all right, we're going to throw a node here, node here, node here, and then flatten out the bottom. Maybe flatten it out a little bit less. And then we can go ahead and get a vector math node set to scale, and then bring that geometry up. Bring that scale down. There we go. We have some really nice displacement that we're showing. And then a way that you can play with this, and once we get to the animation portion, it is going to really look awesome for animation, is to say, let's do a trim curve node. And that's how you can say, hey, we can animate it like this, or random value, plug that into the end, and then just bring them like relatively close to each other. And then you can bring them both and animate that. And again, we'll revisit this later. So I would say actually save. We're going to save this and go. We're just going to call it whatever we want. And then we can come back to this later once we get into the portion where we talk about where and when can we animate different things. One more thing you can do, say you don't want these to be circles. So you don't want these to be circles. If that doesn't make sense, just go ahead and delete the curved circle that we're using to define the geometry and do a curve line, plug that into the profile, and then just do 0 on that. And then it's the X. Oops, come on now. It's the X that we're creating like this. And then you can just do a extrude mesh node, uncheck individual, and just bring that down a little bit. Well, almost all the way. And then now we have some geometry. And so now the displacement is created through the geometry. Maybe make this like 3. There we go. So there we go. That is how we can visualize the geometry flat, just like this, similar to what we did in the shading, but this time instead of shading, we're visualizing it geometrically. So that is all of the displacement and visualization. Now we're going to get into all of the ways that we can all the ways that we can animate all of this stuff. So let's get into that. So since we're here in the curves, we might as well just show you, like I just did. You can keyframe this coming in like that. Check that out. You could do it like that. Check that out. All right, so you can keyframe that using the geometry, which is super fun. Now, I'm gonna just delete this random value. I'm gonna just remove the trim curve. We don't need that. There's another thing you can mimic a similar behavior, and I did it in this animation here, which is doing that behavior in the shading. So instead of a curved line, I'm going to go back to a curved circle, and we're going to plug him here, resolution of like 3, and then 0.005. That's way too small. 0.05. Is there something wrong? No, there's not. Okay. So I'm going to use whatever material is already on this geometry. I'm going to go here to shading, and there's something you can do. We're going to go here to Eevee, and we can delete it with transparency. So what I can do is I'm just going to use a mix shader for this. We're going to do a transparent BSDF like that. Now you can see how it's grain. There's a grainy kind of transparency. You can switch that if you are in the Eevee engine. You can go to the shading and go from dithered to blended, and it's going to be a perfectly smooth transparency. So that's better. What you can do is get a color ramp, and then you can get a gradient texture. I'm going to get a Control T, use the object coordinate, plug that here, and that is going to create a transparency change. What we can do is animate or drive that transparency with an empty. So I can go back here to Eevee. Since we're using the object coordinate, I can say use the empty. And then if I select my empty, and then I use my arrow here, see that? You can control transparency with an empty. So in this animation, as I moved my camera along, so did the empty. They were parented, and it moved that transparency with it. The benefit of doing the trim curve was you can add some variation. I have not figured out how to add variation, at least with a looping animation. You can do it if you want to animate without a loop, but looping it, I couldn't do it. So let's take some displacement. Do I have a project file with displacement already on? Yes, okay. So go ahead and get a grid with displacement. So I'm gonna do this because this was mirrored, but we are going to mirror. So go ahead, if you want to do it with me, get a grid that is 10 by 10. And then it does not matter how subdivided it is, but get a grid that is displaced. So go ahead, and I'm going to go, I don't know why it's like that. Geometry nodes. Sweet. So go ahead, get a grid and displace it however you want. It does not matter how you displace it because the mirroring will be the same. Let's go ahead and mirror this. Now, what we're going to do is create an animation where we're just running a camera through this, and the animation, how we can make a looping animation by visualizing this geometry. So very important to note that this is 10 by 10. So if I take a plane here and go S5, it is going to be perfectly within this. So in real space, it's 5 by 5. So that's easy to remember. What I want to do, let's just go ahead and create that mirror like I showed you. So we're going to go ahead and get a transform geometry and a join geometry, and then plug this here. I'm going to bring this to -5. Well, that wasn't correct. -10, there we go. And then we're going to go also do -1, and that's going to mirror that. So what I can do now is get a camera. So is it right? Yeah. So I'm going to delete this camera, get a brand new camera. And if I hit the tilde key, go to the top, you can see where this camera's origin point is. I want its origin point to be the very edge of this. And if you look here in the transform, that location is exactly 5. So I'm just going to bring him up, bring him to the side. I'm going to hit 0 to look at him. I'm going to give him like a focal point of like, a focal length of like 100. Bring him up, make him look down. But keeping the X location at 5, or whatever could be the Y location for you. Whatever it is, its origin point needs to be at the same exact line that this guy starts. So to animate it, I'm just gonna, I don't know, we'll do 300 frames. To animate it, we are gonna wanna bring this guy exactly from here to here, from one end of this to the other. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back to frame 0 here, and then go to the end. And then if I go here to the tilde key, I hold down Control, it's going to be 15. Now normally we would just go to the +5 to the -5, but we need to make this a looping animation, so we'll go to the extra mirror, just like that. What that's going to do is that, but once we get here, oops, what's going on here? We need to do one more mirror so that the first thing he sees, see this, is the last thing he sees visually. So I'm going to get another transform geometry, another join geometry, and say, what does he need to be? The -20. Keeping all the math right. So now, if I press play, notice where the end of my timeline is right here. We're just going to watch and watch and watch. You can hear a motorcycle outside. We're watching, and then as we get to the end, whoop, it's the exact same because we mirrored it, and then we duplicated that mirror so that the first and last thing in terms of like the displacement it sees is tiled, which allows us to loop it. Now, is that mirror visible? Yes, there's a way you can get around it. I'm not too worried about it, but that is the way that you can do it, making a loop with the mirror. All right, I want to show you guys how to, let's go, what can we do? What can we do? What we can do? Let's just delete. Let's just go here to the shading and delete everything in the scene and just start fresh. So I'm gonna hit Shift-A, get a plane, hit the period key. Something like this. Here in the shading, we're gonna create a new situation. We're going to do some transparency, and I'm going to show you guys how to create a little something interesting on the floor of your animation. If you already have some map stuff on top, those grid floors, I'm going to show you how you can make them a little bit more interesting. So we're going to get a mix shader, and we're going to get emission and a transparent. So emission, transparent. And then I'm going to go here to the EV view. See that kind of noisiness? That just means here in the shading, it needs to go from dithered to blended. So here in the factor, we're going to get a color ramp, and then let's get a Voronoi. So we're just going to make a simple dot grid like we've been doing. So bring this random here, and then we're going to go from linear to constant. So I'm bringing this up like this, like that. What I want to do now is I'm going to duplicate this. I'll bring it down by a good bit. And then right up here, I'm going to click this number 2 so it's not duplicated. And then I'm going to go to Chebyshev, flip this color ramp, then bring this higher. And then I'm also make my dots a little bit smaller too. So now what's going to happen is whenever if your camera is moving in your scene, you have a really, really cool parallax. You can use parallax to your advantage. I don't know why they're scaling in and out like that. you can use parallax to your advantage. So see that? And so then you can just throw right on geometry wise, you can throw your map, your displacement map on top, and then underneath. So like in this animation, you can see it working, but that's all shading. You can do it differently. But now you have this parallax effect. So you can use parallax. This technically nothing's animating other than the camera movement, but it creates this simulation of movement because of the parallax, because there's a distance between the two. So maybe rather than creating the separation of those patterns within the shading system, you can create that separation of pattern literally in space, separate them out, and create something that looks really awesome. All right, last thing I want to show you is how you can take curves. So for example, in this animation, I was duplicating curves in a circle. In this example, I'm going to show you we're just duplicating curves in a line like I showed you before, but how you can add these really cool animations where, you know, it's not just like, okay, they're all in a line. So I'm going to show you how to map the curves so they follow, so they're actually following displacement, and then also how to randomize their position so that it looks really, really cool. So this will be the last little thing before this is all over. So let's just go ahead and build this. I'm going to open up just a window like that, get in a grid, or switch to Geometry Nodes Editor, new, and then let's build the quadratic Bezier thing I showed you earlier. So we're just going to get quadratic Bezier, plug it here. We're going to get all of them just to be a value of 0. I'm going to do a resolution of 300. And then on the Y, we'll do a scale of 10. And then let's go ahead and array them down the line. Get a simulation. Do that. Do a little set position. Join geometry. And then go like that. We want to say probably right about that much. Make it a square, and then we'll go ahead and bake that. So we got about 62 duplicates. And in this case, I'm just going to leave it here for the displacement. So let's get a set position and a combine X, Y, Z, so that we can say, hey, noise texture, only displace on the Z. We'll click on normalize, give it a big scale. And then just for detail's sake, let's go ahead. We're going to get our RGB curves and tell it flatten out a little bit here. There we go. So now we have a little bit of this fun stuff. Let's give it some geometry. Curve to mesh, a curved circle, give it a radius of like 0.005, resolution of like 6, plug it in. Okay, so now we have just what we had before, but let me show you again, like I showed you, how we can get those cool animations. And it's going to be done with 2 attributes. So first, let's get in a set material node. Right over here, we'll go ahead and create that material. We'll just tell it to be emissive. And then I'm going to actually just open up a new window here so we can look at everything at the same time. The context here, I think, is pretty important. So I'm going to switch this to the shader editor. So right now we just have this, we're just going to go here to Eevee. We just have plain that. So let's go ahead and plug a wave texture into the color, and we're going to get a color ramp. And so if I play with the phase offset, you can see where the wave texture is affecting this animation, and we saw this earlier too. So we have the wave just doing that. Now I want it to go the other direction, so I'm going to go here to a location of Y. We can bring this back a little bit. We have this phase offset, and maybe we can make it bigger, bring it down, and now maybe bring my world brightness back up so we can see everything. So you can see the wave, how it's behaving, right? Doing that. Now, what it's not understanding, especially if I switch this over to a constant offset, what the wave texture is not understanding is this curve is changing directions. It's just traveling straight down it. It's not respecting that there's displacement. The curve is moving around. It goes up, it goes down. How can we get the shading to understand that there are things going on in the geometry? Well, it's going to be done with two attributes. Well, one attribute, we're going to do two attributes to have some fun. So we're going to get a store named attribute, and I'll just duplicate and get two of them. So what we need to do is first be very intentional about where we're placing this, because right now what we need to do is send curve information to the shading. If we were to place this store named attribute after this curve to mesh, it's not going to be able to read it because it's essentially reading geometry information. We want to collect that data when it's just curve, no geometry, just curves. That's going to be right before the curve to mesh. So first we need a spline parameter node. And then we're going to plug the factor into the value, and we'll just leave it like this. This one over here, what I want to do is also, once we have this wave actually respecting the displacement and the position of the curves, I would actually randomize where this white portion shows up. I don't want it all to be in the same line. So how can I do that? What I would want to do is randomize this phase offset per curve. So the way I could do that is say, okay, I want this this change to respect splines. I want to recognize there are splines here. We're going to do a random value node and plug that into value. We're going to call this one R for random. I'm going to call this one S for spline. So what this is doing is assigning a random value, a random number for every single one of these curves. And that is going to be something really cool. And this spline parameter is able to send the information about the curves to be able to be read here in the shading. So let's play with that. So let's get those two attribute nodes right here. Let's get R and let's get S. So spline parameter, we're going to plug that factor right into the vector. This is essentially our mapping. So plug that into the vector. And now you can kind of see some differences here. From that, just a perfect straight down wave. It's just treating it all like a single same object. So once we plug the S attribute into the vector, you'll see some slight changes. That's how you'll know, okay, it is understanding and respecting the changes in geometry and how the curve is moving around. So it's respecting it. Now what I want to do is change the fact that all of the curves are being affected by the same phase offset, one single value. I want to have a unique value, a unique position per one of these curves. So that's where this R attribute is going to come from, the random value. If we plug factor into that, you'll see, okay, it looks like they're all in different spots, but still kind of in a line. That's just because the values aren't dramatic enough. The way you can strengthen an effect is to go into the math and add in a multiply. And then in this case, I actually want to do a multiply add node. So I still have the multiplier and have access to an add, which still is going to be where I can add my keyframe to animate this effect. And then before we're done, so you can add a keyframe right there for animation, I can duplicate this wave, throw it here, and then when I play with the phase offset here, it's going to just move those guys around in a really interesting back and forth way. So there you go. That is all of the ways you can animate it, create the geometry, do the whole thing. Like I said, my goal with this was to give you all of like the ingredients, all of the tools that can help you make these topographic map inspired animations. And you can take those and make your own ideas. And again, those 4 tutorials on YouTube are designed to help you kind of guide you with how can we kind of mix all these things together. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.